Well, everyone, we're halfway through the class. I hope you have or had a happy 4th of July, depending on when you watch the video. So because of the 4th of July holiday, this week is a little shorter and your reading homework is a little less. I also kind of did that intentionally because you have the paper coming up. So don't forget that on the 5th of July, you have the works cited page due. There's a drop box on Canvas. And also on the 11th of July, you have your paper due, which again, you'll put in a drop box. Both of those should be either a Word document or a PDF. Also, about the paper, I just want to recap that it should have an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. The introduction, again, should look like this a little bit, where you start off broad and then narrow down to your topic and kind of highlight your main points. Also, the body of your paper should flesh out those main points, and in the paper, the body of the paper, make sure you cite your sources as you use them. Don't just put a works cited page or bibliography at the end. You have to actually note somehow when you're using the information. Also, in the conclusion, remember that there's no new information in a conclusion and that you should summarize your main points, but you don't repeat the intro. And also, there's no personal pronouns used because it is a formal paper. But you're making the case for a person or event being the most important person in church history. You might wonder, how can you do that without personal pronouns? You just state it like fact. You're just saying the Crusades are the most important event in church history, and these are the 3 reasons why. Okay? So speaking about important events in church history, there's 2 major events that you're going to read about this week. The first of those events is the Renaissance. Basically, this happened after the Black Plague. And remember, 1/3 of the people in Europe died because of the bubonic plague. And so everyone knew someone who died, and everyone was now in touch with their own kind of eternity. And so everyone was really wrapped up in the emotion of that. And they chose to express this in lots of different ways. There was kind of an academic reformation that happened and an artistic reformation. The academic one happened near Germany, kind of in the north, and this was kind of a rebirth in thought and in reading the Bible and studying ancient manuscripts and things like that. And of course, that's where the printing press was developed by Johannes Gutenberg, and so now everyone could read the Bible, which was incredible. And then in the south, primarily in Italy, is where the rebirth began with the arts. Okay, so if you kind of zoom yourself back in time to Florence, Italy, this was the center of it all. And there was a wealthy family there called the Medicis, and they were real patrons of the arts. So they started paying people top dollar to create artwork for them. And the artwork all started to change, where everyone was stoic and serious and stationary. Now in the Renaissance, you see people in movement, showing emotion, expression, real emphasis on the human body being beautiful, and some real realistic portrayals of those things. So if you ever have a chance to go to Florence, Italy, I highly recommend it. Center of the Renaissance, you'll see some incredible artwork. Personally, this is my favorite era in art. But some really great things came out of that. But again, that was kind of born of this real tragic moment where so many people lost so much. This really rebirth, this new way of thinking, this new idea really led to the Reformation, okay? The Reformation kind of officially began with a man named Martin Luther. Martin Luther was an Augustinian Catholic priest, and he disagreed with several things that were happening at the time. One of those big things was the selling of indulgences. This was essentially like asking people to pay money to get them out of purgatory so that they could go to heaven quicker. And of course, no one has any control over how long someone spends in purgatory. And just again, in case you don't understand purgatory, it's a Catholic belief of a place that we would go on our way to heaven. And I used to think of it like a place, and I just said that, but it's really could be considered more like a process, okay? It's a purification process that helps us become pure and holy and worthy of heaven. But we believe that that happens on our way to heaven. People go to purgatory after this life before they go to heaven, and they don't, if you go to hell, you don't go to purgatory. It's just on the way to heaven. But anyway, there were some priests who were really abusing this idea of selling indulgences, John Tetzel being one of them. And so Martin Luther totally disagreed with that. He also didn't agree in how the Catholic Church was saying people were saved, which was a combination of faith and works. And again, he's going off of what Augustine said and who was going off of what St. Paul said and what Augustine argued with the Pelagians about, but what helps us get to heaven. And so Martin Luther believed that it was your faith alone. Sola fides is what he called it, faith alone. The other big thing for Martin Luther dealt with Scripture. He didn't believe that the church should teach anything that wasn't strictly mentioned in the Bible. And so, as a result, for example, with the sacraments, he only believed that the two sacraments should be baptism and Eucharist. Why those two? Because Jesus himself was baptized and Jesus himself was at the Last Supper. So that's all based on Scripture and very clearly in Scripture. So those were his big three complaints. But he did write about his concerns in what's called the 95 Theses. And this was posted on a church in Wittenberg, Germany. Now, just for the record, this was a common thing to post your thoughts about something so that people knew about an upcoming debate. Like, here's what I think. If you want to talk about it, meet me, here at this time. So that was a pretty common thing. But for whatever reason, the people really agreed with what Martin Luther said, and they started revolting against the church. When the church finally heard about what he wrote, they demanded that he retract everything that he said. They gave him a certain amount of time to do that. When he didn't do that, he was excommunicated. Now, I think it's fair to say that Martin Luther didn't set out to start a new church, that he was a Catholic priest who really wanted to see some change happen. At that moment, the church wasn't really open to this change. Eventually, they were a little more open to it. After several other reforms, there was the Council of Trent where they met to discuss this. They invited the reformers to come to openly discuss it. None of the reformers showed up. So in the end, they did address a few of those concerns, but basically, for the most part, just solidified this is what the Catholic Church teaches about these things. So they really didn't change their mind about many things, but rather just reaffirmed them. The one thing they did agree with, or one of the things, was about the indulgences. Those were no longer sold, and they did set up seminaries after that point in time so that priests would have more preparation, so you wouldn't see as many priests abusing their position. That's kind of a simplified explanation of how it started. There were several reformers after Martin Luther: Ulrich Zwingli, John Calvin, Henry VIII, all of whom you're going to read more about. And in their cases, they agreed with Martin Luther on some things and disagreed or highlighted some things in more detail. For example, John Calvin really highlighted the idea of predestination. And Henry VIII, who I feel a particular connection with because his sixth wife was one of my relatives, but Henry VIII simply wanted to divorce his wife, which wasn't allowed in the church. And so to be able to do that, he started his own church. So you'll read about some of these new reform efforts and how that really changed the face of Christianity. It's pretty interesting. We talked about the heresies and the heretics. And again, I would say that if it wasn't for people who said what they disagreed about, changes would never have happened. The church wouldn't keep forming and shaping what it is to be the Catholic Church or to be a Christian in the Christian faiths. And again, we talked last week about the Great Schism, but this was a great split with a lot of different people, and it evolved into a very elaborate kind of delineation of different beliefs and different faiths in these many, many different denominations of Christianity that we have today. So again, I hope you have a good week. I will talk to you next week.